Rain poured down as a young girl stood by the roadside, clutching a basket of apples no one wanted to buy. Soaked to the bone, she still smiled when a quiet cowboy stopped and bought them all, every last one. To her, he was just a kind stranger with a soft voice and muddy boots. But days later, carriages filled the street, and that same cowboy returned, not in rags but in wealth. The girl who sold apples in the rain had just served a hidden tycoon. The rain came down like judgment. It hammered the dirt streets of Crestwood into rivers of brown mud, swallowing wagon tracks and boot prints alike. Thunder rolled across the valley, slow and heavy, like something dragging itself across the sky. The wooden buildings leaned into the wind, their shutters banging, their signs swinging on rusted chains. People hurried past with their heads down, collars pulled up, hats dripping. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked twice at anything that didn't shelter them. Except her. The girl stood at the corner of Main Street and the alley that led to nowhere, her canvas awning torn at the edges, flapping uselessly in the wind. Water streamed down her face, plastering dark hair against her cheeks. Her dress was soaked through, clinging to her thin frame, and her boots, worn so thin the soles were cracked, sank into the mud with every shift of her weight. In her arms she clutched a woven basket, apples, red, green, bruised in places. Some still had leaves clinging to their stems. She didn't move. Her stall was barely a stall at all, just a plank of wood balanced across two crates, the kind of thing that could be swept away by a strong wind or a careless horse. But it was hers, and she wasn't leaving. A man in a long coat rushed past, splashing cold water across her knees. She flinched but didn't step back. Another woman hurried by, pulling a child close under a shawl. The child's eyes caught hers for a moment, wide, curious, but the mother yanked him forward, disappearing into the gray. The girl's fingers tightened around the basket handle. She needed to sell 3 more apples. Just 3, that would be enough for the medicine. The apothecary had promised her a discount if she came before nightfall, but only if she had the coins. Real coins, not promises, not prayers. Her father was waiting, lying in the back room of their cabin at the edge of town, his breathing shallow, his skin pale as old paper. The fever had taken hold 2 weeks ago, and it hadn't let go. Every morning she woke expecting silence. Every evening she returned and found him still there, still fighting. But time was running out. She straightened her back, wiped the rain from her eyes, and called out again. "Apples! Fresh apples!" Her voice was swallowed by the storm. No one turned. The sky darkened further, the clouds pressing down like a lid on a pot. Lightning split the horizon, white and jagged, and for a moment the whole street lit up. The mud, the buildings, the faces of people who wouldn't meet her gaze. Then the thunder came, deep and rolling, shaking the ground beneath her feet. She shivered, not from cold, from something deeper, a weight that had been sitting on her chest for weeks now, pressing down every time she thought about going home empty-handed, every time she imagined the apothecary shaking his head, the door closing, the medicine staying on the shelf while her father's breath grew quieter. She wouldn't let that happen, so she stood there, rain pouring over her torn canvas, mud soaking through her boots, and waited. That's when she heard it. Hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, the kind of rhythm that didn't match the hurried chaos of the storm. She looked up, blinking water from her eyes, and saw him. A man on horseback, moving through the rain like a shadow-given form. His hat was wide-brimmed, soaked black, pulled low over his face. His coat was long and torn at the edges, heavy with water, and it hung off his broad shoulders like something that had seen too many miles. The horse beneath him limped, favoring its left front leg, its head hanging low. Steam rose from its flanks, mixing with the rain. The man didn't hurry. He guided the horse forward with a light touch, his movements calm, almost gentle. As he passed the saloon, the blacksmith shop, the general store, people glanced his way and then looked down. Something about him made them uneasy. Maybe it was the way he moved, like someone who'd learned not to rush because rushing never saved you. Or maybe it was the silence that seemed to follow him, heavy as the rain itself. The girl watched him approach. Her heart beat a little faster, not from fear, from something else. Hope, maybe, or desperation dressed up as hope. The man stopped, right in front of her stall. His horse stood still, breathing hard, water dripping from its mane. The man didn't dismount. He just sat there, one hand resting on the saddle horn, the other loose at his side. His face was hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but she could see his eyes, dark, tired, carrying something heavy behind them. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand and gestured toward the basket. "How much?" His voice was low, rough around the edges, like gravel rolling in a river. The girl blinked, surprised. She'd been calling out for hours and no one had stopped. Now this stranger, soaked and silent, was asking. 2 cents, she said quickly, her voice barely louder than the rain. 2 cents for one, 3 for 5. He didn't haggle. He reached into his coat, fumbling for a moment, and pulled something from an inner pocket. When his hand came back into view, she saw it. A coin, glinting dull gold even in the storm's gray light. Her breath caught. It was too much, far too much. I don't have change for that, she stammered, staring at the coin in his palm. I only need, keep it. His voice was quiet, final, not unkind, just done. He leaned forward slightly, holding the coin out to her. She hesitated, her hands trembling, then reached up and took it. The metal was warm, heavier than it should have been. She closed her fingers around it, feeling its weight settle into her palm like a promise. Take 2, he said, nodding toward the basket. She didn't argue. She reached in, pulled out the 2 best apples she had left, and held them up. He took them without a word, slipping one into his coat pocket and biting into the other. The sound of it, crisp, clean, cut through the rain. He chewed slowly, his gaze drifting past her, out toward the edge of town where the road disappeared into the hills. Then he looked back at her, just for a moment. Get out of the rain, he said. Before she could respond, he nudged his horse forward, turning down the alley beside her stall. The animal limped after him, obedient and tired, and within seconds they were gone, swallowed by the gray mist and the drumming of the rain. The girl stood there, frozen, the gold coin burning in her hand. She looked down at it, turning it over in her palm. There was no mark on it, no name, just smooth metal worn by time and use. It was enough to buy the medicine, enough to buy food for a week. Maybe more. Her chest tightened. She wanted to call after him, to thank him, to ask why, but her voice wouldn't come. The rain kept falling, cold and relentless, and the street remained empty. She tucked the coin into the pocket of her dress, pressing it close against her ribs, and gathered her basket. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold, from something else. Relief, fear, gratitude mixed with suspicion. Who was he? Why did he give her so much? And why did his eyes look like someone who'd been running for a long time? She didn't have answers. But as she folded her canvas, packed her apples, and turned toward home, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, a sliver of hope. The rain followed her all the way back to the cabin. By the time she reached the door, her dress was heavier than ever, her boots caked in mud. She pushed inside, shutting the wind out behind her, and stood there for a moment, dripping onto the floor. "Papa?" Her voice echoed in the small space. The cabin was dark, except for the dying glow of the fire in the hearth. She crossed to the back room, where her father lay on a low cot beneath a threadbare blanket. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. She knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his forehead. Still warm, still fighting. "I got the money," she whispered. "I'm going to get your medicine. You're going to be all right." He didn't wake, but his chest rose and fell, slow and sure, and that was enough. She stood, pulling the coin from her pocket, and stared at it in the firelight. It gleamed softly, almost alive. She thought of the man on the horse, his quiet voice, his tired eyes. Who was he? And why did he stop for her? Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside, for the first time in weeks, the girl felt like maybe, just maybe, mercy was real. By the time she returned from the apothecary, the rain had softened to a drizzle. The streets were quieter now, the storm retreating into the hills. She clutched the small glass bottle close to her chest, wrapped in brown paper, and walked quickly through the mud. The apothecary had taken the coin without question, though his eyebrows had lifted when he saw it. He'd asked where she'd gotten it. She'd told him the truth, a stranger on a horse. He'd nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, and handed her the medicine along with a small cloth sack of bread and dried meat. "For your trouble," he'd said quietly. She hadn't known what to say. Now, as she walked home beneath the gray sky, she felt the weight of the day pressing down on her, the exhaustion, the fear, the strange, quiet kindness of a man whose name she didn't know. She reached the cabin just as the sun began to break through the clouds. pale and uncertain. She pushed the door open, stepped inside, and found her father awake, his eyes open, watching the ceiling. "Papa." He turned his head slowly, his gaze finding hers. A faint smile touched his lips. "You're soaked," he rasped. She laughed, the sound tight and breathless, and crossed to him, kneeling beside the cot. "I got your medicine." His eyes widened slightly. "How?" "A man," she said softly. "A stranger. He gave me enough." Her father stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing through his gaze. Then he reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her cheek. "You're a good girl," he whispered. "Too good for this world." She blinked back tears, her throat tight, and helped him sit up. She uncorked the bottle, poured a measure into a tin cup, and held it to his lips. He drank slowly, grimacing at the bitter taste, then lay back down with a soft sigh. "Rest now," she murmured, pulling the blanket up over his chest. He closed his eyes, his breathing already evening out, and within minutes he was asleep. She sat there beside him, her hands folded in her lap, and stared at the fire. The flames flickered and danced, casting long shadows across the walls. She thought of the man again, the way he'd looked at her, the coin in his hand, the quiet weight of his voice. "Get out of the rain." It had sounded like a warning, or maybe a prayer. She didn't know which. But as the night settled in and the rain finally stopped, she found herself listening for the sound of hoofbeats outside her door. They never came. The next morning, the town woke to pale sunlight and the smell of wet earth. The streets were still slick with mud, but the storm had passed, leaving behind a strange, brittle peace. The girl rose early, as she always did, and stepped outside to check the road. The sky was clear, the air cool and sharp. Birds called from the trees at the edge of town, their voices bright and insistent. She went back inside, made breakfast for her father, thin porridge and yesterday's bread, and watched him eat. His color was better, his hands steadier. The medicine was working. "I'm going to set up the stall again," she told him. "I'll be back before dark." He nodded, too tired to argue, and she slipped out the door. But when she reached the corner of Main Street, where her stall had stood the day before, she stopped. Someone had been there. The plank was gone, the crates were overturned. And nailed to the post beside the alley was a piece of paper, fluttering in the breeze. She walked closer, her heart pounding, and read the words scrawled across it in black ink. "Who is the man with the gold coin?" Her blood went cold. She tore the paper down, crumpling it in her fist, and looked around. The street was empty, no one watching, no one near. But someone had been here, someone had seen, and now they wanted answers. She shoved the paper into her pocket and hurried back toward the cabin, her breath coming quick and shallow. The coin, the stranger, the question that hung in the air like smoke. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew, deep in her bones, that the rain hadn't washed everything away. It had only just begun. Sunlight broke through the clouds that morning, pale and thin, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The girl stood at the edge of her property, staring at the crumpled paper in her hand. The words were simple, black ink on yellowed parchment, but they sat heavy in her chest like stones. Who was the man with the gold coin? She'd read them a dozen times now, hoping they'd change. They didn't. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Her father shuffled onto the porch, one hand gripping the doorframe for balance. His face still looked hollow, but there was color in his cheeks now, more than yesterday. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. She turned quickly, folding the paper and tucking it into her apron pocket. "Nothing, Papa. Just checking the road." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes sharp, despite the fever that had dulled them for weeks. He'd always been able to read her, even now. Sick as he was, he saw through her. But he didn't press. "Come inside," he said quietly. "It's too cold out here." She nodded and followed him in, but her mind stayed outside, on that question nailed to the post, and on the man who'd ridden into the storm like something out of a half-remembered dream. By midday, the town was alive again. Wagons rolled through the muddy streets, horses pulling loads of lumber and grain. The blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady rhythm. Women gathered near the well, buckets in hand, voices low and quick. Children ran between buildings, their laughter bright and careless. But there was something else in the air now, whispers. The girl felt them before she heard them. She'd set up her stall again, this time closer to the general store, where foot traffic was heavier. Her basket was lighter today, only a dozen apples left, but she needed to sell them. The medicine had cost most of what the stranger gave her, and there were still bills to pay. Flour, firewood, Rent on the cabin, small as it was. She arranged the apples carefully, setting the best ones on top, and tried to ignore the way people looked at her as they passed. Not at her, exactly. At the space around her. Like she'd brought something with her they didn't want to touch. A woman in a blue shawl walked by, glanced at the apples, then at the girl's face. Her expression tightened. She looked away and kept walking. Two men standing outside the saloon stopped talking when they saw her. One of them nudged the other, nodding in her direction. They didn't approach. The girl's stomach twisted. She called out, her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. Apples! Fresh apples! No one stopped. An older man with a gray beard paused near her stall, his hand hovering over the basket. For a moment she thought he'd buy one, but then his eyes flicked to hers, and something shifted in his expression. Suspicion. Or maybe fear. He pulled his hand back and walked away without a word. The girl's hands curled into fists. What had she done? She'd sold an apple to a stranger in the rain, that was all. She hadn't stolen anything, hadn't lied, hadn't broken any law she knew of, but the town had decided otherwise. The sun climbed higher, and the whispers grew louder. By the time the sheriff appeared, the girl had sold only one apple, to a boy too young to know better, who'd handed her a penny and run off grinning before his mother could stop him. Sheriff Dalton was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from stone and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a star on his chest and a gun on his hip, and when he walked, people moved out of his way. He stopped in front of her stall. The girl's breath caught. Afternoon, he said, his voice calm, almost polite. Afternoon, Sheriff. He looked at the apples, then at her. His gaze lingered, measuring. You're the one who was out here yesterday, during the storm. It wasn't a question. She nodded. Yes, sir. Heard you had a visitor. Her heart beat faster. She kept her face still, her hands folded in front of her. A man bought some apples. That's all. What'd he look like? She hesitated. The memory of the stranger was clear in her mind. The tired eyes, the torn coat, the way he'd sat so still on that limping horse. But something told her to be careful. I didn't see much, she said quietly. It was raining hard. His hat was low. The sheriff's jaw tightened. But you saw enough to take his money. He paid for apples, she said, her voice steady. That's what I do. I sell apples. Dalton leaned closer, resting one hand on the edge of her stall. His voice dropped, low and edged. You know what kind of coin he gave you? She didn't answer. Gold, he said. Real gold. Not many folks around here carry that kind of money. Makes people wonder. Wonder what? Where he got it. Who he is. Why he'd give it to a girl selling apples in the rain. The girl's throat tightened. I don't know who he was. He didn't say. But you took the coin. I sold him apples, she repeated, her voice firmer now. That's not a crime. The sheriff straightened, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he just looked at her, and she felt the weight of it, the suspicion, the judgment, the unspoken accusation that she'd done something wrong by being kind. Finally he nodded. If he comes back, Dalton said quietly, you let me know. Why? His eyes sharpened. Because I said so. He tipped his hat, turned and walked away, his boots heavy in the mud. The girl stood there, her hands trembling, and watched him go. Around her, the whispers started again. By evening, she'd sold 2 more apples. She packed up the rest and started the walk home, her basket light, her heart heavy. The sun was sinking behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was the sheriff's voice. If he comes back. Like the stranger was dangerous. Like she'd done something wrong by helping him. She reached the cabin just as the light began to fade. Her father was sitting by the fire, a blanket over his lap, his hands folded. He looked up when she came in, and his expression softened. How was today? She set the basket down and forced a smile. Slow. He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. People talk? She didn't answer right away. She crossed to the hearth, warming her hands over the flames. Some about the man. She glanced at him, surprised. How did you know? This town's small, her father said quietly. News travels fast, especially when it smells like trouble. The girl's chest tightened. I didn't do anything wrong, Papa. I know. Then why are they looking at me like I did? Her father sighed, a deep, weary sound. Because people are afraid of what they don't understand. And kindness, real kindness, scares them more than cruelty ever could. She stared at him, her throat tight. You did right, he said, his voice firm. Don't let them tell you otherwise. She nodded, blinking back tears, and turned away before he could see them fall. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her father's breathing in the next room. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cabin was dark except for the faint glow of moonlight through the window. Her mind kept circling back to the same questions. Who was the stranger? Why had he given her so much? And why did the sheriff care? She thought about the way the man had looked at her, not with pity, but with something quieter. Understanding, maybe, or recognition, like he'd seen something in her that she didn't even see in herself. Get out of the rain. Those words echoed in her mind, soft and persistent. Had he been warning her, or just caring for her, the way any decent person would? She didn't know. But as the hours stretched on and the moon climbed higher, she found herself listening again, for the sound of hoofbeats, for the creak of the porch, for anything that might tell her he was still out there somewhere, thinking about the girl who'd sold him apples in the rain. But the night stayed silent, and eventually she drifted into uneasy sleep. The next morning, she woke to the sound of voices outside. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding, and crossed to the window. The sun was barely up, the sky still gray with dawn, but there were people in the street, a lot of them. She pulled on her boots and stepped outside. A crowd had gathered near the center of town, clustered around something she couldn't see. Men and women stood shoulder to shoulder, their voices low and urgent. The sheriff was there, standing at the front, his arms crossed. The girl moved closer, her stomach knotting. What's going on? She asked a woman standing at the edge of the crowd. The woman glanced at her, then looked away quickly. Poster came in this morning, from the county seat. What kind of poster? The woman didn't answer. She just pointed. The girl pushed forward, weaving between bodies until she could see. There, nailed to the post outside the general store, was a new piece of paper, larger than the one she'd found yesterday, printed in bold black letters. Missing heir to the Wilmore Ranch. Reward for information. Below the words was a sketch, rough but clear enough. A man's face, wide-brimmed hat, tired eyes, strong jaw. The girl's breath stopped. It was him, the stranger who'd given her the gold coin, the man who'd ridden into the storm and disappeared like smoke. Her hands went cold. Around her, the voices grew louder. That's him, isn't it? The one who was here yesterday. She talked to him. I saw her. The girl felt their eyes turn toward her, sharp and accusing. She took a step back, her heart pounding, and then another. The sheriff's gaze found hers across the crowd. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The message was clear. She was part of this now, whether she wanted to be or not. She ran, not from the crowd, but from the weight of their stares, from the questions she couldn't answer, from the fear crawling up her spine like cold fingers. She didn't stop until she reached the cabin. Her father was awake, sitting at the table, a cup of water in his hands. He looked up when she burst through the door, his eyes widening. What happened? She couldn't speak. She just pulled the crumpled paper from her pocket, the first one, the question, and slammed it onto the table. Then she told him, about the poster, the sketch, the reward, about the way the town had looked at her, like she'd brought a curse into their streets. Her father listened in silence, his expression darkening with every word. When she finished, he set the cup down carefully and stared at the paper. You didn't know, he said quietly. No, and you'd do it again, wouldn't you? Even knowing what you know now. She looked at him, her throat tight. Yes, she whispered. He nodded slowly. Then hold on to that, no matter what comes next. She wanted to ask what he meant, but before she could, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, steady, deliberate. The girl's blood turned to ice. Her father met her eyes, his jaw set. Don't open it. But the voice that came through the wood wasn't the sheriff's. It was softer, younger. Miss, please, I need to talk to you. The girl hesitated, then crossed to the door and cracked it open. A boy stood on the porch, maybe 16, with dark hair and nervous eyes. He held his hat in his hands, twisting the brim. I'm sorry to bother you, he said quickly, but I saw what happened in town, and I thought you should know. Know what? The boy glanced over his shoulder, then leaned closer. The man you helped, the one on the poster, he's not a criminal. He's the heir to the Wilmore estate, richest family in 3 counties. But he left, walked away from all of it. The girl's heart pounded. Why? Because they built that fortune on the backs of people who couldn't fight back. Stole land, burned homes. His father did terrible things, and when he found out, he couldn't stomach it, so he left. She stared at him, her mind reeling. How do you know this? My uncle worked for them. He told me. The boy's voice dropped. The family wants him back, not because they miss him, because if he doesn't return, the whole estate goes to the state. Everything they built, gone. They need him to keep their name clean. The girl's breath came quick and shallow. And the reward? It's real. But it's not for justice. The boy's eyes were fierce now. It's for control. Before she could respond, he shoved something into her hand, a folded piece of paper, and stepped back. He left you something, the boy said. Under the post where your stall was. I found it this morning before anyone else did. Then he was gone, running back toward town, his footsteps fading into the morning light. The girl stood there, frozen, staring at the paper in her hand. Her father's voice came from behind her. What is it? She didn't answer. She just unfolded it. Inside, in careful, slanted handwriting, were 4 words. Keep your kindness quiet, and beneath them a single line. They'll come for you next. Her hands trembled. Outside, the sun climbed higher, bright and indifferent. And somewhere beyond the hills, the man with tired eyes kept riding, away from everything he'd ever known, toward something he couldn't name, but not alone, because the girl who'd sold him apples in the rain now carried his warning in her pocket, and whether she knew it or not, she'd already chosen which side of mercy she stood on. The days that followed were quiet, in the way a held breath is quiet. The girl went about her work, selling apples, tending to her father, sweeping the cabin floor. But everything felt different now, heavier, like the air itself had thickened, pressing down on her shoulders with every step. She kept the stranger's note folded in the pocket of her dress, tucked against her ribs where she could feel it when she moved. The paper had grown soft from touching, the ink slightly smudged, but the words remained clear. Keep your kindness quiet. She tried, but the town wouldn't let her. Every morning when she set up her stall, eyes followed her, the blacksmith's wife, the banker's son, old Mrs. Harrow, who'd lived in Crestwood longer than anyone could remember. They watched her like she was a puzzle they couldn't solve, or a wound that wouldn't heal. Some of them whispered when she passed. Others just stared. No one spoke to her directly anymore, not even to bargain for apples. Her basket stayed full most days. She'd come home with nearly everything she'd taken out that morning, her hands empty of coins, her heart heavy with something she couldn't name, not quite anger, not quite sadness, something in between. Her father noticed. You're not eating enough, he said one evening, watching her push food around her plate. I'm fine, Papa. You're lying. She looked up, startled by the sharpness in his voice. His eyes were clearer now, stronger. The medicine had worked. But the worry hadn't left his face. You can't keep this up, he said quietly. Selling to people who won't buy. Standing in a town that's already made up its mind about you. Where else would I go? He didn't answer right away. He just reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His skin was warm, rough from years of work, and the weight of it steadied her. Wherever you need to, he said finally, and I'll follow. She blinked back tears and nodded, her throat too tight for words. 3 days after the poster appeared, the stranger came back. She didn't see him at first. She was at the stall, arranging apples that no one would buy, when she heard the sound of hammering behind her. Steady, rhythmic, metal on wood. She turned, and there he was, kneeling in the dirt beside her broken cart, the one that had been lying on its side since the storm, his hat pulled low, his coat dusty from the road. He had a hammer in one hand and a handful of nails in the other, and he was fixing the wheel she'd thought was beyond repair. Her heart stopped. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She just stood there, staring at him, her mind racing. He shouldn't be here. The whole town was looking for him. The sheriff had made it clear. If anyone saw him, they were supposed to report it. There was a reward, a real one, enough money to change a life. But he was here, fixing her cart like it was the most natural thing in the world. She glanced around quickly, her pulse hammering. The street was quiet. Most people were inside, sheltering from the midday heat. But that wouldn't last. Someone would see. Someone always saw. You need to leave, she said, her voice low and urgent. He didn't look up, just kept hammering. Wheels loose, won't hold if you load it. I don't care about the wheel. You need to go. Almost done. She stepped closer, her hands trembling. They're looking for you. The whole town. There's a poster. I know. His voice was calm, too calm, like he'd already accepted whatever was coming. She knelt beside him, grabbing his wrist to stop the hammering. Then why did you come back? He finally looked at her. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the weariness etched into his face. He looked older than she'd thought. Not old, maybe 30, maybe a little more, but worn down by something heavy, something he'd been carrying for a long time. Because I said I would, he said quietly. She stared at him, confused. You didn't say anything. Not to you. He pulled his wrist free gently and went back to work. To myself, the hammer came down again, once, twice, driving the nail home. Then he stood, testing the wheel with his boot. It held. There, he said. Should be fine now. She rose slowly, her mind still spinning. I don't understand. You don't have to. He wiped his hands on his coat and reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a small cloth bundle. He held it out to her. She didn't take it. What is it? Bread, dried meat, some cornmeal. He set it on the edge of her stall. Figured you might need it. Her throat tightened. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. Then why? Because you didn't turn away when I needed help. His voice was quiet, but there was weight behind it. Seems fair to return the favor. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need charity, that she could take care of herself, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, she did need it. Her father needed it, and pride didn't fill empty stomachs. So she nodded, her eyes burning, and picked up the bundle. Thank you, she whispered. He tipped his hat. You take care, miss. Then he turned to leave. Wait. He stopped, glancing back. She hesitated, her heart pounding. The note you left, the one that said to keep quiet. What did you mean? His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, his shoulders dropping slightly. There are people looking for me, he said. Not because I did anything wrong, because I walked away from something they think belongs to them. And they don't like losing. Your family, he nodded. If they find out you helped me, they'll come for you too. Not with guns, with questions, pressure. They'll make your life harder than it already is. He met her eyes, and there was something almost sad in his gaze. I didn't want that for you. But you came back anyway. I came back to finish what I started. After this, I'm gone for good. You won't see me again. The finality in his voice hurt more than she expected. What if I don't want you to go? The words slipped out before she could stop them, and her face flushed. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't meant to admit that somewhere in the last few days she'd started hoping he'd come back, that she'd been listening for hoofbeats every night, half in fear, half in something else. He looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. You're a good person, he said quietly. Don't let this town make you forget that. Then he swung up onto his horse and rode away, disappearing down the alley the same way he'd come. The girl stood there, the bundle of food in her arms, and watched until he was out of sight. That evening, she brought the food home and set it on the table without a word. Her father looked at it, then at her. Where'd this come from? A friend? What friend? She didn't answer. She just started unpacking the bundle, laying out the bread, the meat, the cornmeal. Her hands moved quickly, mechanically, but her mind was somewhere else, on the stranger's voice, on the way he'd looked at her, on the fact that he'd risked everything to come back and fix a broken wheel she didn't even need. Her father watched her in silence. Then quietly he said, He came back, didn't he? She froze. The man from the storm, the one on the poster. She swallowed hard and nodded. Her father leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. You talked to him? A little, and he's not what they say he is. What do they say he is? Dangerous. A thief. Someone who needs to be brought back. Her father's eyes sharpened. And what do you say he is? She looked at him, her throat tight. Someone who's tired of running. Someone who just wanted to be left alone. Her father studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Sounds like someone worth knowing. She blinked, surprised. You're not angry? Why would I be angry? Because she gestured helplessly. Because everyone's looking for him. Because helping him could get us in trouble. We're already in trouble, her father said quietly. Have been since the day you stood in that rain and refused to give up. One more act of kindness isn't going to change that. Her eyes burned. She looked down, blinking hard. You did right, her father said, his voice firm. And if he comes back again, you do right again. You hear me? She nodded, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. Relief, gratitude, and something else. Hope. The stranger came back 2 days later. This time he didn't fix anything. He just appeared at the edge of her property at dawn, his horse grazing quietly in the tall grass. He was sitting on a fallen log near the tree line, his hat in his lap, watching the sunrise. The girl saw him through the window and nearly dropped the kettle she was holding. She set it down carefully, wiped her hands on her apron, and stepped outside. He looked up when he heard her approach, but he didn't stand, just nodded once, calm and quiet. "Morning," he said, "morning." She stopped a few feet away, uncertain. "You're back. Seems that way. I thought you said you were leaving for good." "I did." "Then why are you here?" He looked out at the horizon, where the sky was turning from gray to gold. "Thought I'd help with the fence. Noticed it's leaning." She glanced toward the split-rail fence that ran along the property line. He was right. Half of it was sagging, held up more by habit than structure. "I can't pay you," she said. "Didn't ask you to." "Then why?" "Because I'm here, and the fence needs fixing." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Unless you'd rather I didn't." She stared at him, her heart pounding. She should say no. She should tell him to leave before someone saw him. But instead, she heard herself say, "There's coffee inside, if you want some." He looked at her, something soft passing through his eyes. "I'd like that." They worked in silence most of the morning. He fixed the fence while she tended to the garden, pulling weeds and watering the few vegetables that had survived the storm. Her father sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching them with quiet approval. No one spoke much. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt safe, the kind that didn't need filling. Around midday, the stranger straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. That should hold for a while. The girl looked up from her work, brushing dirt from her hands. "Thank you." He nodded, then glanced toward the cabin. "Your father doing better?" "Yes. Thanks to the medicine." "Good." He picked up his hat and started toward his horse. "Wait," she said. He turned. She hesitated, her heart pounding. "You could stay. For lunch, I mean." "It's not much, but I'd like that," he said quietly. And for the first time since he'd ridden into the rain, he smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. They ate on the porch, bread, cheese, and the dried meat he'd brought. Her father joined them, his strength returning a little more each day. The three of them sat in the shade, the afternoon sun warm on their skin, and for a while the world felt simple again. The stranger didn't talk much about himself, but he listened. He listened when the girl told stories about growing up in Crestwood, about her mother who'd passed when she was young, about the orchard that used to stand where the town square was now. He listened when her father spoke about the old days, before the fever, before the town started closing in on itself. And when the girl asked him why he left his family, he was quiet for a long time. Then finally he said, "Because staying would have made me a part of something I couldn't live with. And leaving made me free." He looked at her, his eyes steady. "But it also made me alone." She held his gaze, her chest tight. "You're not alone now," she said softly. He didn't answer. But the way he looked at her, quiet, grateful, and just a little afraid, told her everything she needed to know that night after he'd ridden away again. The girl lay awake in her cot, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the way he'd smiled, the way he'd worked without asking for anything in return, the way he'd said her name when she handed him a cup of water, like it mattered, like she mattered. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself imagine a life where kindness wasn't punished, where helping someone didn't make you an outcast, where standing in the rain wasn't something you did alone. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and apples, and somewhere beyond the hills, the man with tired eyes made camp beneath the stars, thinking of the girl who'd refused to turn him away. Twice now, maybe 3 times. He didn't know how many more chances he'd get. But he knew one thing for certain. He'd keep coming back until the world made her regret it, or until she told him to stop. And so far she hadn't. So he kept riding, toward trouble, toward hope, toward the only place that had felt like home in years. A broken fence, a fading cabin, and a girl who sold apples in the rain. The morning came cool and gray, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain but never delivered. The girl woke early, as always, and lay still for a moment, listening. Her father's breathing was steady in the next room. The wind rattled the shutters. A crow called from somewhere beyond the fence line, Everything seemed normal, but something felt wrong. She couldn't name it, just a tightness in her chest, a whisper at the back of her mind that said, "Today is different." She pushed the feeling aside, dressed quickly, and stepped outside to check the weather. That's when she saw it. Nailed to the post at the edge of her property, flapping in the wind like a broken wing, was a poster, the same one she'd seen in town a week ago. Missing heir to the Wilmore Ranch. Reward for information. And beneath the sketch of the stranger's face, someone had written in thick black ink, "Ask the Apple Girl." Her blood went cold. She tore the poster down, her hands shaking, and looked around. The road was empty. The fields beyond were still. No one watching. No one near. But someone had been here. In the night. While she slept. They'd come to her home and marked her. She crumpled the paper in her fist, her breath coming quick and shallow, and turned back toward the cabin. Her father was standing in the doorway, his face pale. "What is it?" he asked. She held up the poster, her throat too tight for words. He took it from her, smoothed it out, and read the message. His jaw tightened. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "What?" "Pack what you can. We're leaving Crestwood." She stared at him, stunned. "Papa, we can't just—" "Yes, we can." His voice was firm, harder than she'd heard it in weeks. "This town has made its choice, and we're not safe here anymore." "But where would we go?" "Anywhere." He looked at her, his eyes fierce despite the weariness in his face. "Anywhere is better than staying here and waiting for them to decide what to do with us." She wanted to argue, wanted to say they couldn't just abandon everything they'd built, small as it was. But the truth sat heavy in her chest. He was right. The town had already turned on her, and it was only going to get worse. They didn't leave. Not that day, because before they could pack a single bag, the stranger appeared at the edge of the property, his horse moving slow and steady through the morning mist. The girl saw him first. She was standing on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, when his shape emerged from the gray. For a moment she thought she was imagining it, that her mind had conjured him out of worry and exhaustion. But then he dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud, and she knew he was real. Her heart leapt and sank at the same time. "You shouldn't be here," she called out, her voice sharper than she intended. He stopped a few feet from the porch, his hat in his hands. "I know. Then why are you—" He looked at her, and the weight in his eyes made her chest ache. "Because I heard what happened. What they did." She glanced at the crumpled poster sitting on the porch rail. "How did you—" "Word travels." He took a step closer. "I'm sorry. This is my fault." "It's not. It is." His voice was low, steady, but there was anger beneath it. Not at her. At himself. "I should have stayed away. I knew what they'd do. And I came back anyway." "I'm glad you did," she said quietly. He looked up, surprised. "I'm glad," she repeated, her voice stronger now. "Because you're the only person in this whole town who's treated me like I matter, who's helped without asking for something in return. So don't you dare apologize for that." He stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing through his expression. Then slowly he nodded. "All right," he said. "Then let me help you now." "How?" "By telling you the truth." They sat on the porch, the girl, her father, and the stranger, while the wind picked up and the sky darkened. The stranger set his hat on the rail and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "My name's Daniel," he said. "Daniel Wilmore." The girl's breath caught. She'd heard that name before. Everyone had. The Wilmores owned half the county. Land, cattle, timber, mines. They were the kind of family people whispered about with a mix of envy and fear. "I was supposed to inherit everything," Daniel continued, his voice quiet. "My father built that empire from nothing, or at least that's what I was told growing up. That he was a visionary, a pioneer, a man who saw opportunity where others saw dust." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But when I got older, I started asking questions. About where the money came from, about the land we owned, about the people who used to live on it." The girl's father leaned forward, listening intently. "Turns out my father didn't build anything," Daniel said, his voice hard. "He took it. Burned families out of their homes. Paid the sheriff to look the other way. Made deals with men who didn't care how many lives got crushed as long as the profits kept rolling in." He looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused from years of work. "When I confronted him about it, he told me that's how the world works. That power doesn't come from kindness. It comes from taking what you want and holding on to it no matter who gets hurt." The girl's throat tightened. "So I left," Daniel said simply. packed a horse, took what I could carry, and rode out in the middle of the night. I thought if I disappeared, maybe I could start over. Be someone who wasn't built on someone else's suffering. But they're looking for you, the girl said. He nodded, because if I don't come back, the estate goes to the state. Everything my father stole gets redistributed, and the family can't let that happen. Not because they care about justice, because they care about keeping their name clean. So they sent people after you, not just people. His eyes darkened. Lawyers, detectives, men who know how to pressure someone without breaking the law. They'll find everyone I've talked to, everyone who's helped me, and they'll make life hard for them until I have no choice but to come back. The girl's stomach twisted. That's why you left the note. The one that said to keep quiet. Yes, but you came back anyway. I came back because I'm tired of running. He looked at her, his gaze steady. And because I didn't want you facing this alone. Her heart pounded. What are you going to do? Her father asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then he said, I'm going to tell them the truth. Publicly, in front of the whole town. The girl's eyes widened. You can't. I can, and I will. His voice was firm. If I stay hidden, they'll keep hunting, keep hurting people. But if I stand up and tell everyone what the Wilmore fortune really is, what it cost, maybe I can take away their power, or they'll destroy you, her father said quietly. Daniel smiled, but there was no humor in it. Maybe. But at least I'll go down knowing I tried. The girl stared at him, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. Admiration, fear. Something deeper. When? She whispered. Tonight, at the town meeting. The town meeting was held in the saloon every month. A chance for people to air grievances, discuss business, and argue about things that wouldn't matter come morning. But tonight, the room was packed. Word had spread fast. The missing heir was back, and he had something to say. The girl stood at the back of the room with her father, her heart pounding. She'd tried to convince Daniel not to do this, but he'd refused. Said it was the only way. Now, as she watched him walk through the doors, his hat in his hand, his coat dusty from the road, she felt fear coil in her stomach like a snake. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward him. Sheriff Dalton stood near the bar, his hand resting on his gun. The mayor sat at the front, his expression unreadable, and scattered throughout the crowd were faces the girl recognized. The blacksmith, the banker, Mrs. Harrow, the men who'd whispered when she passed. Daniel stopped in the center of the room. For a long moment he just stood there, letting them look at him, letting them see the man behind the poster. Then he spoke. My name is Daniel Wilmore, he said, his voice clear and steady, and I'm here to tell you the truth about my family. The room erupted. Voices rose, angry and confused. Someone shouted for the sheriff to arrest him. Another demanded to know where he'd been. Daniel didn't flinch. He waited until the noise died down, then continued. My father built the Wilmore fortune on stolen land, on burned homes and broken families. He made deals with corrupt men and paid sheriffs to look the other way while people lost everything they had. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I didn't know, Daniel said, his voice heavy. Not until I was old enough to ask questions. And when I did, my father told me that's how you survive in this world. You take what you want, you hold on to it, and you don't apologize. He looked around the room, meeting eyes. But I couldn't live with that. So I left. I walked away from the money, the power, all of it. Because I'd rather be no one than be someone built on someone else's pain. The sheriff stepped forward. That's a nice speech, Wilmore, but it doesn't change the fact that your family's looking for you, and there's a reward. I know. Daniel's jaw tightened. And I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to think about what that reward really means. It means the Wilmore family keeps their power, keeps their land, keeps pretending they earned it. He turned, his gaze sweeping the room. But if I don't go back, the estate gets redistributed. The land goes back to the people it was taken from. The money gets used for something other than lining pockets. The room was silent now. So here's what I'm offering, Daniel said. Let me stay. Let me work. Let me be part of this town not as an heir but as a man who's willing to earn his place. And if you can't do that, then turn me in. Collect your reward. But know that when you do, you're choosing their side. Not yours. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then, slowly, someone spoke. How do we know you're telling the truth? It was the blacksmith, his arms crossed, his face skeptical. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a folded stack of papers. "These are land deeds, contracts, letters, all signed by my father, proof of everything I just said." He held them up, then set them on the nearest table. "Read them, verify them, and then decide." The meeting broke apart after that, voices rising in argument and debate. Some believed him, others didn't. The sheriff looked ready to arrest him on the spot, but the mayor held up a hand, saying they needed time to investigate. Daniel didn't wait for their decision. He walked out into the night, the crowd parting around him like water around stone. The girl followed. She caught up to him at the edge of town, where his horse was tied to a post. He was checking the saddle, his movements slow and deliberate. "Daniel," he turned. She didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to put into words everything she was feeling. The fear, the pride, the ache in her chest that came from watching someone stand up when the world wanted them to kneel. So she just said, "That was brave." He smiled, but it was sad. Brave or stupid, hard to tell the difference sometimes. "It was brave," she said firmly. He looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them. Something quiet and unspoken. "I meant what I said in there," he told her, "about earning my place. If this town will have me, I'd like to stay." Her heart pounded. "And if they won't, then I'll keep riding." He paused. "But I'd like to know, if I stayed, would you want me to?" She stared at him, her throat tight. "Yes," she whispered. He nodded slowly, his eyes soft. "Then I'll do everything I can to make that happen." That night, the girl lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. But this time, she wasn't listening for hoofbeats. She was thinking about the way Daniel had stood in that room, shoulders square, voice steady, and told the truth even when it would have been easier to run. She was thinking about the way he'd looked at her afterward, like she mattered, like her answer mattered. And she was thinking about the fact that somewhere, tonight, men in fine suits were deciding whether to let him stay or drag him back to a life he'd already escaped once. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain, and in the distance, thunder rolled. But this time the girl wasn't afraid, because she'd seen what courage looked like, and it looked like a man with tired eyes and a torn coat, standing in front of a crowd and choosing truth over safety. It looked like mercy, and she'd already decided which side of that she stood on, even if it cost her everything. Morning came with fog so thick it swallowed the world. The girl woke to silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that felt like something waiting. She lay still for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of the world outside. No birds, no wind, just the heavy quiet of fog pressing against the windows. She rose, dressed, and stepped onto the porch. The apple cart was gone. She stood there, staring at the empty space where it had been, her mind slow to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. The cart she'd used every day for as long as she could remember, the one Daniel had fixed with his own hands just days ago. Gone. Not stolen. Destroyed. She found the pieces scattered across the property line. Splintered wood, broken wheels, apples crushed into the mud. Someone had taken an axe to it, hacked it apart with deliberate violence, and left the wreckage like a message. Her hands trembled as she knelt beside the ruins. This wasn't an accident. This was punishment. Behind her, the cabin door opened. Her father appeared, leaning heavily on the doorframe, his face pale. "They came in the night," he said quietly. "Who? Does it matter?" His voice was heavy with exhaustion. "The ones who think they're protecting this town. The ones who think kindness is weakness." The girl's throat tightened. She picked up a piece of the broken cart, a plank of wood that still had her mother's initials carved into the corner. She'd done that years ago, back when the girl was small, back when the world felt safer. Now it was just kindling. "What do we do?" she whispered. Her father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We survive." The girl didn't go into town that day. She stayed home, sitting on the porch with the broken pieces of her cart at her feet, trying to figure out how to rebuild something that felt irreparably broken. Her father's health, which had been improving steadily, took a turn. The stress of the night before had worn him down, and by midday he was back in bed, his breathing shallow, his skin clammy. She gave him the last of the medicine, but she knew it wasn't enough. She needed more, which meant she needed money, which meant she needed to sell apples. But she had no cart, no way to carry them, and even if she did, no one would buy from her. The town had made its choice, and she was on the wrong side of it. She sat there until the sun began to sink, painting the fog orange and gold, and tried not to cry. That's when she heard the horse. Slow hoofbeats, muffled by the fog. She looked up, her heart leaping into her throat, and saw Daniel emerge from the gray like a ghost, materializing from memory. He dismounted before he reached the porch, his eyes taking in the wreckage scattered across the property. His jaw tightened. "When?" he asked, his voice low. "Last night." He knelt beside the broken wood, running his fingers over the splintered edges. "Anyone hurt?" "No, just the cart," he repeated, his voice edged with something dark. He stood, his hands curling into fists. "They're cowards. They're scared," the girl said quietly. "That's no excuse." "Maybe not." She looked at him, her chest tight. "But it's the truth." He turned to her, and the anger in his eyes softened into something closer to pain. "This is because of me. This is because of them," she corrected. "You're not the one who took an axe to my cart. You're not the one who decided I was guilty for showing kindness." He stared at her for a long moment, then looked away. "I should go, what? I should leave Crestwood, leave the county, go far enough that they forget about me. Maybe then they'll leave you alone. And if they don't?" He didn't answer. The girl stood, her hands shaking. "You think running will fix this? You think if you disappear they'll suddenly forgive me? It's the only way to keep you safe. I don't want to be safe." The words burst out of her, sharper than she intended. "I want to matter. I want what I did to mean something, and if you leave now it means they won. It means kindness loses." Daniel looked at her, his expression torn. "I don't want you to suffer for my mistakes. They're not mistakes." She stepped closer, her voice fierce. "You told the truth. You stood up to people who've been lying for years. That's not a mistake. That's courage. Courage doesn't pay for medicine," he said quietly. "Doesn't fix broken carts. Doesn't keep your father alive." The words hit like a punch, because he was right. She looked down, her throat burning, and said nothing. Daniel watched her for a moment, then sighed. He walked to his horse, reached into his saddlebag, and pulled out a small leather pouch. He held it out to her. "What is it?" she asked. "Enough to buy medicine, food, whatever you need for the next few months." She stared at the pouch, then at him. "I can't take that. You can. You will, Daniel, please." His voice cracked just slightly. "Let me do this. Let me help." She took the pouch, her hands trembling, and felt the weight of coins inside. Too many coins. Enough to change everything. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, then turned back to his horse. "Where are you going?" she asked. "North. There's work up in the highlands, mining camps, timber crews, places where no one asks your name, and you'll just disappear for a while." He swung up into the saddle, then looked down at her. "Until things settle. Until it's safe." "Safe for who?" He didn't answer. The girl watched him gather the reins, her chest aching. She wanted to ask him to stay, wanted to tell him that she didn't care about the danger, that she'd rather face it with him than face safety alone. But the words wouldn't come. So she just stood there, silent, as he tipped his hat and rode away into the fog. This time, she didn't know if he'd come back, and that hurt more than the broken cart ever could. The days that followed were long and cold. The girl used the money Daniel had given her to buy medicine, flour, firewood. She rationed it carefully, making each coin stretch as far as it would go. Her father's health stabilized, but he didn't improve. He just hovered in that in-between place, too weak to work but too stubborn to give up. She tried to set up a stall again, this time with just a basket and a cloth spread on the ground. But no one stopped. People walked past her like she was invisible, their eyes sliding away whenever she called out. Some crossed the street to avoid her. Others whispered as they passed, their voices just loud enough for her to hear. "That's the one. The girl who helped the Wilmore boy. Heard she took his money. Probably knew who he was all along." She kept her head down and tried not to listen, but the words burrowed into her skin like splinters. By the end of the first week, she'd sold 3 apples. By the end of the second, none. Her basket stayed full, the apples slowly bruising, turning soft, rotting from the inside out. Just like her hope. One evening, as the sun set and the streets emptied, Sheriff Dalton appeared beside her stall. She looked up, startled, her hands tightening around the basket. "Sheriff." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Evening." She waited, her heart pounding. He glanced at the apples, then at her. "You're wasting your time out here." I don't have anywhere else to go. You could leave. And go where? He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his hand resting on his belt, his gaze distant. That boy you helped, he said finally. Daniel Wilmore. You know where he went? Her stomach twisted. No, you're lying. I'm not. She met his eyes, steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. He left. I don't know where. The sheriff studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed, a deep, weary sound. His family's offering more money now, he said. Double the original reward. They want him back bad. I don't care about the money. I know. His voice was quieter now, almost sad. That's what makes this harder. She stared at him, confused. You're not a criminal, Dalton continued. You didn't do anything wrong. But this town... He gestured vaguely at the empty streets. This town doesn't know the difference between kindness and conspiracy. And as long as they think you're hiding something, they're going to keep punishing you for it. So what are you saying? I'm saying you should think about leaving. Before things get worse, things can't get worse. He looked at her, and something in his eyes made her stomach drop. Yes, he said quietly, they can. Then he tipped his hat and walked away, his boots heavy on the dirt. The girl sat there, alone in the gathering dark, and felt the weight of his words settle over her like a shroud. That night, she found another note. It was tucked under a stone on her porch, folded and sealed with wax. She didn't recognize the handwriting. She opened it by candlelight, her hands shaking. Inside, in neat, careful script, were 6 words. He's safe, thinking of you. D. Her breath caught. He was alive. Somewhere out there, in the highlands or beyond, Daniel was alive and thinking of her. She pressed the note to her chest, her eyes burning, and let herself cry for the first time since he'd left. Not from sadness, from relief, and from the ache of missing someone she'd only known for a handful of days but who'd changed everything. Far to the north, in a mining camp perched on the edge of a mountain, Daniel sat by a fire, staring into the flames. His hands were blistered from the work, his back ached, his clothes were caked with dirt and sweat, but he didn't care. All he could think about was the girl standing on that porch, holding a basket of apples that no one would buy, her eyes fierce and sad and full of something he didn't deserve. He'd sent the note through a rider passing south, paying him double to make sure it reached her. He didn't know if it had, didn't know if she'd even want to hear from him, but he had to try, because she'd stood by him when the whole town turned against her, because she'd refused to let him apologize for being himself, because when he looked at her, he saw something he'd spent his whole life searching for and never thought he'd find, someone who believed kindness was worth the cost. He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night, and made a promise to himself. He'd come back, not right away, not until he'd earned enough to help her rebuild, not until he had something to offer beyond trouble and danger. But he'd come back, and when he did, he'd make sure she never stood alone again. Winter came early that year. Snow fell in soft, relentless waves, blanketing Crestwood in white. The streets turned to ice, the buildings huddled together like frightened animals, and the girl's stall disappeared beneath the drifts, forgotten and buried. She stayed inside most days, tending to her father, rationing the food Daniel's money had bought. She read by candlelight, mended clothes that had been mended a dozen times before, and tried not to think about how quiet the world had become. But every night, before she slept, she pulled out the note. He's safe, thinking of you. And she whispered into the dark, hoping somehow across all those miles he'd hear her. I'm thinking of you too. Outside, the snow kept falling, and somewhere in the highlands a man with tired eyes worked through the cold, counting the days until he could ride south again, toward redemption, toward home, toward the girl who taught him that mercy wasn't weakness, it was the only thing worth fighting for. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, like it wasn't sure the world deserved it. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and frozen mud beneath. The streams swelled with runoff, rushing and loud. The air smelled of earth and ice and something raw, something unfinished. The girl stood at the window of the cabin, watching the world thaw, and wondered if Daniel was watching the same sky somewhere far away. It had been 4 months since he'd left. 4 months of silence broken only by 2 more notes. Short, careful messages delivered by riders who wouldn't meet her eyes. Each one said the same thing in different words. I'm alive. I'm working. I haven't forgotten. But he hadn't come back. And with each passing week, the girl felt the hope inside her grow thinner, stretched too tight, ready to snap. Her father's health had stabilized through the winter, but he was weaker now, older somehow. The fever had taken something from him that medicine couldn't replace. He spent most days by the fire, wrapped in blankets, staring at flames like they held answers he couldn't quite see. The town had left them alone, mostly. No more broken carts, no more threatening notes, just silence. The cold, deliberate silence of people who'd decided you didn't exist. The girl had stopped trying to sell apples weeks ago. There was no point. Instead, she took in mending work, sewing torn clothes and patching blankets for the few people who'd still do business with her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them fed. Barely. She'd learned to live small, to want less, to expect nothing. But some mornings, when the light came through the window just right, she still found herself listening for hoofbeats. The town woke on the first day of April to the sound of horses, not one or two, but dozens. The girl heard them from inside the cabin, a low thunder rolling down the main street, steady and purposeful. She set down the shirt she was mending and went to the window. A procession was moving through Crestwood, wagons, riders, men in dark coats carrying papers and ledgers. At the front, on a tall gray horse, rode a figure she recognized even from a distance. Daniel. Her heart stopped. He sat straight in the saddle, his hat pulled low, his coat new and clean. He looked different somehow. Not just older, though the months had carved new lines around his eyes. He looked settled, like someone who'd made a decision and was done running from it. The procession stopped in the town square. People emerged from buildings drawn by the noise and the spectacle. The blacksmith, the shopkeepers, Mrs. Harrow with her shawl pulled tight. Sheriff Dalton, his hand resting on his gun, his expression wary. The girl grabbed her coat and hurried outside. By the time she reached the edge of the square, a crowd had gathered. She pushed through, her heart pounding, until she could see. Daniel had dismounted. He stood in the center of the square, surrounded by men in suits, lawyers, by the look of them, and crates filled with papers. Behind him, the wagons creaked under the weight of more documents, ledgers, deeds. The mayor stepped forward, his face tight with confusion and suspicion. "What's the meaning of this, Wilmore?" Daniel looked at him, calm and steady. "I'm here to set things right." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "What things?" the mayor demanded. Daniel turned, addressing the crowd now, his voice carrying clear and strong. 4 months ago, I stood in that saloon and told you the truth about my family, about how they built their fortune on stolen land and broken lives. Some of you believed me. Most of you didn't. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. "I don't blame you for that," Daniel continued. "Talk is cheap. Anyone can stand up and make accusations, but I wanted to give you more than words." He gestured to the wagons behind him. "These are the records. Every deed, every contract, every piece of paper my father signed to take land that wasn't his. I've spent the last 4 months tracking them down, verifying them, making sure they'd hold up in any court in the territory." The sheriff stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Why?" "Because I'm dissolving the Wilmore estate." Silence crashed over the square like a wave. Daniel let it settle, then continued. "Every acre my family took through fraud or force is being returned to its rightful owners. Every debt they held over people's heads is being forgiven. Every contract signed under duress is void." The mayor's face went white. "You can't do that. I already have." Daniel's voice was hard now, edged with steel. "The papers were filed last week. It's legal, it's final, and there's nothing my family can do to stop it. But the money's gone." Daniel looked around the square, meeting eyes. "I gave most of it away. The rest went to paying lawyers and tracking down the families my father destroyed. There's nothing left except land, and I'm giving it back." The crowd erupted. Voices rose in disbelief, anger, confusion. Some people shouted questions, others argued amongst themselves. The sheriff looked like he wanted to arrest someone but couldn't figure out who. And through it all, Daniel stood perfectly still, waiting. The girl watched from the edge of the crowd, her chest so tight she could barely breathe. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Finally, the mayor raised his hand for silence. When the noise died down, he fixed Daniel with a cold stare. "Let's say we believe you. Let's say you're not lying or crazy. What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Daniel said simply. "Nothing. I'm not asking for gratitude. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking you to read these documents, verify them, and help return the land to the people it was stolen from." He paused, then added quietly, "And I'm asking you to stop punishing the people who showed me kindness when I had nothing to offer in return." His eyes found the girls across the crowd. Her breath caught. Around them, people turned to look, following his gaze. She felt their stares like brands against her skin. The mayor's expression soured. "You mean the apple girl? I mean a woman who offered help to a stranger in a storm," Daniel said, his voice hard. "Who did nothing wrong except treat another human being with decency, and who's been punished for it every day since." Murmurs rose again, uncertain now. Daniel stepped forward, pulling a folded document from his coat. "This is the deed to the Wilmore orchard. 60 acres of apple trees at the valley's edge. My father planted them 20 years ago on land he stole from the Mercer family." He held up the deed so everyone could see. "I'm offering it to Miss—" He paused, realizing he didn't know her last name. "Ellis," she called out, her voice small. "Sarah Ellis." "To Miss Sarah Ellis," Daniel continued, "as a partnership. She'll manage the orchard, hire workers, sell the harvest. Half the profits go to her. The other half goes to rebuilding this town the right way." The square went silent. Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. An orchard, 60 acres, a future. "I don't understand," she whispered. Daniel crossed the square toward her, and the crowd parted like water. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes soft. "You taught me what wealth means," he said quietly. "It's not money, it's not land, it's being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know you did right by people. You gave me that when I had nothing. Let me give you this." Her throat burned. "I can't." "You can." His voice was gentle but firm. "You're the only person in this town who proved that kindness doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. And that orchard, it should belong to someone who understands that." She looked at the deed in his hand, then at his face, and saw the truth there. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering partnership, respect, a chance to rebuild not just her life, but something bigger. Slowly, she reached out and took the deed. Her hands shook as she unfolded it, reading the words that transferred ownership of the orchard to Sarah Ellis and Daniel Wilmore, equal partners in perpetuity. "It's real," she breathed. "It's real," he confirmed. Around them, the crowd began to shift. The anger was fading, replaced by something else, uncertainty, curiosity, and in some faces, the first flickering of shame. The blacksmith spoke up, his voice gruff. "What about the rest of us? The ones whose land was taken?" Daniel turned. "Check the wagons. Find your family name. If your land was stolen, the deed is in there." Free and clear. People surged forward, pushing toward the wagons, searching through the crates of documents. Voices rose, some excited, some disbelieving. Names were called out, old grievances unearthed. The girl watched it all, the deed clutched to her chest, her heart pounding. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low so only she could hear. "I'm sorry it took so long." "You came back," she said. "That's what matters. I said I would." "I know." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "But I wasn't sure I believed it." Something passed between them then, something quiet and fierce and fragile. "Believe it now," he said softly. The town meeting that night lasted until dawn. People shouted, argued, cried. Old wounds were opened, new questions raised. But slowly, painfully, the truth emerged. Daniel's documents were real. The land had been stolen, and now it was being returned. Not everyone was happy. Some of the wealthier families, the ones who'd profited from the Wilmores' dealings, argued that the transfers weren't legal, that Daniel didn't have the authority. But the lawyers he'd brought shut that down quickly. Every document had been filed properly. Every legal requirement met. The estate was dissolved. The land redistributed. It was done. By morning, the square was littered with papers and exhausted people. The mayor sat on the steps of the general store, his head in his hands. The sheriff leaned against a post, smoking a cigarette, his expression unreadable. And Sarah stood at the edge of it all, watching the sun rise over the valley, the deed still in her hands. Daniel found her there. "You should get some rest," he said. She shook her head. "I don't think I could sleep if I tried." He smiled, tired but genuine. "Me neither." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the light spread across the hills. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we work." He glanced at her. "If you still want to—" "I do. It won't be easy. The orchard's been neglected for years. It'll take time to bring it back." I'm not afraid of work. I know. His voice was soft. That's why I thought of you. She looked at him, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. Gratitude, hope, something deeper. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. He turned to face her fully. You saved my life, Sarah. Not just in the rain that day. Every time I thought about giving up, going back, accepting that the world was broken and there was nothing I could do. I thought about you, about the way you stood in that storm and refused to quit. That's what kept me going. Her breath caught. So don't thank me, he said again. Let's just build something together, something good. She nodded, her throat too tight for words, and as the sun climbed higher, painting the valley in gold, they stood there side by side. Two people who'd been broken by the world's cruelty. Two people who'd chosen kindness anyway. Two people who were about to prove that mercy wasn't weakness. It was the foundation of everything worth building. The weeks that followed were a blur of work and wonder. Daniel and Sarah rode out to the orchard together, taking the long road through the valley. The trees were wild, overgrown, their branches tangled and thick with deadwood. But beneath the neglect, Sarah could see the bones of something beautiful. It'll take a full season to bring them back, Daniel said, walking between the rows. Maybe 2. Then we have time, Sarah replied. They hired workers, people from town who'd lost land or jobs, who needed a second chance the way Sarah had. Together they pruned the trees, cleared the undergrowth, repaired the old irrigation channels. Sarah's father, stronger now with good food and purpose, came to help when he could. He sat beneath the trees, offering advice, telling stories about the old days when orchards like this covered the valley. And slowly, the trees began to respond. Buds appeared on the branches. Green leaves unfurled. And by the time summer arrived, the first blossoms opened, white and delicate and full of promise. Sarah stood beneath them one morning, her face turned up to the light filtering through the petals, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Daniel found her there, his hands dirt-stained, his shirt rolled to his elbows. What are you thinking? That it's beautiful, she said. That I can't believe this is real. It's real. He stood beside her, following her gaze upward. And it's just the beginning. She looked at him, and for the first time, she let herself see what had been growing between them all these months. Something careful, something earned, something that felt like home. Daniel, she said softly. He turned to her, and in his eyes she saw the same thing reflected back. Recognition, understanding, and the quiet, fierce certainty that some things were worth every hardship it took to reach them. Yeah, he said. She smiled. I'm glad you came back. Me too, he said. And when the rain came that afternoon, soft and warm, nothing like the storm that had brought them together, they stood beneath the blossoms and let it wash over them. Two people rebuilt by kindness. Two people who'd learned that the greatest fortune wasn't gold. It was finding someone who saw your worth when the world had decided you were worthless. It was standing together in the rain and refusing to let go. The years passed the way seasons do, slowly at first, then all at once, until you look up and realize the world has changed around you while you were busy living in it. The orchard grew, not quickly, not easily, but steadily, stubbornly, the way good things do when they're tended with care. Sarah walked through it now, in the early morning light, her dress brushing through grass still wet with dew. The trees rose around her in neat rows, their branches heavy with fruit, apples in shades of red and green and gold, their skins catching the sun like jewels. She paused beside one of the older trees, running her hand along its rough bark. This one had been nearly dead when they'd started, its trunk split by lightning, its roots exposed. Daniel had wanted to cut it down, said it was too far gone. But Sarah had refused. Give it a chance, she'd said, see if it wants to live. And it had. Now it stood taller than the others, its branches spreading wide, producing some of the sweetest apples in the entire orchard. She smiled, remembering that argument, remembering the way Daniel had looked at her, half exasperated, half admiring, before shaking his head and walking away, muttering something about stubborn women and foolish optimism. He'd learned not to bet against her after that. Behind her, the sound of laughter drifted through the trees. Children's voices, bright and careless. Sarah turned, watching as 3 small figures darted between the rows, chasing each other in some game only they understood. The oldest, a girl of about 8 with dark hair and her mother's eyes, led the pack, her dress flying behind her as she ran. The 2 younger ones, Twin boys with Daniel's strong jaw and quick smiles followed close behind, shrieking with delight. "Not so close to the road," Sarah called out. "Yes, Mama," the girl shouted back, already redirecting her brothers toward the center of the orchard. Sarah's chest tightened with the kind of happiness that still surprised her sometimes, the kind she'd stopped believing in during those cold years when the world felt like it was closing in around her. She'd never thought this life was possible. A home, children, an orchard that stretched across 60 acres of land that actually belonged to her. But here it was, real and solid and hers. "You're up early." She turned to find Daniel walking toward her, his shirt already dusty from morning work, a bucket in one hand. He'd been checking the irrigation lines, making sure water reached every tree before the day's heat set in. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Thinking, remembering." He set the bucket down and came to stand beside her, following her gaze toward the children playing in the distance. "Good memories or bad?" "Both." She glanced at him. "Mostly good." He nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. That was one of the things she loved about him, the way he'd learned to read her silences, the way he knew when to push and when to simply be there. "Your father would have loved this," he said quietly. Sarah's throat tightened. Her father had died 3 years ago, in his sleep, with the sound of the orchard outside his window. He'd lived long enough to see the first real harvest, to hold his grandchildren, to know that the life he'd wanted for his daughter had actually come to pass. She visited his grave every week, a simple marker beneath the oldest apple tree in the orchard, the one they'd planted together that first spring. She brought flowers when they bloomed, apples when they ripened, and stories about the children he would have adored. "He did love it," she said. "Every day of it." Daniel reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. His palm was calloused, warm, familiar. She squeezed back, grateful for the weight of him beside her. "We should start the harvest next week," he said after a moment. "The late varieties are almost ready." "Next week," she agreed. "I'll talk to the crew tomorrow." The crew had grown over the years. What had started as a handful of workers, people Daniel and Sarah had hired from town, people who'd needed second chances, had become something bigger. 20 families now made their living from the orchard, working the land, managing the harvest, helping maintain the trees. Sarah made sure they were paid fairly, made sure their children went to school, made sure no one went hungry or without shelter, because she remembered what it felt like to stand in the rain with nothing. And she'd promised herself she'd never let anyone else feel that way if she could help it. "Thomas stopped by yesterday," Daniel said. "Said the market in Silver Creek wants to double their order. Can we manage that? If the weather holds." He glanced up at the sky, clear and blue. "Should be a good year." Sarah nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the way the orchard had become more than just a business. It had become a community, a place where people came not just to work, but to belong. She thought about Mrs. Harrow, who'd once crossed the street to avoid her, now bringing fresh bread every Sunday. About the blacksmith's son, who'd thrown mud at her cart years ago, now courting one of the orchard workers with fumbling earnestness. About Sheriff Dalton, retired now, who sat on the porch of the main house sometimes, smoking his pipe and telling stories to the children. The town had changed, not overnight, not easily, but slowly as the orchard grew and people saw what kindness could build, they'd started to soften, started to remember that mercy wasn't weakness, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was help someone who had nothing to offer in return. "What are you smiling about?" Daniel asked. She hadn't realized she was. "Just this, all of it." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Me too." The harvest came the following week, as planned. The orchard filled with people, workers moving through the rows with baskets and ladders, children running between the trees, calling out when they found the biggest apples. The air smelled of fruit and earth and sweat, and the sound of voices and laughter echoed across the valley. Sarah worked alongside everyone else, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back. She moved from tree to tree, checking the fruit, making sure nothing was wasted. Daniel worked nearby, lifting full crates onto wagons, his movements easy and practiced. They'd done this together for 7 years now, and every year it felt like a small miracle. By evening, the wagons were loaded, the fruit sorted, and packed. The crew gathered in the clearing near the main house where tables had been set up with food and drink. It had become tradition. After the first day of harvest, they ate together. Sarah stood at the edge of the gathering, watching as people filled their plates, as children chased each other around the tables, as Daniel laughed at something one of the workers said. She felt a presence beside her, and turned to find Emma, one of the younger women who worked the orchard. She had a baby on her hip, a little girl with wide eyes and chubby fists. "Thank you for this," Emma said quietly. "For all of it." Sarah shook her head. "You earned it. You work harder than anyone, maybe." Emma smiled. "But you gave me the chance, when no one else would." Sarah remembered the day Emma had shown up, barely 18, pregnant and terrified, asking if there was work. She'd been turned away from every other place in town. Too young, too inexperienced, too much trouble. Sarah had hired her on the spot. "You deserve the chance," Sarah said simply. Emma's eyes shimmered. She shifted the baby to her other hip and reached out, squeezing Sarah's hand. "My daughter's going to grow up knowing your name, knowing what you did for us. I'll make sure of it." Sarah's throat burned. She squeezed back, unable to speak, and watched as Emma rejoined the crowd. Daniel appeared at her side, slipping an arm around her waist. "You all right?" She nodded, blinking hard. "Just thinking about how far we've come." "Pretty far," he agreed. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it? Your old life?" "No, not even a little." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sometimes I think about what it would have been like if I'd stayed, if I'd never left, if I'd just accepted that the world was the way my father said it was, and I realize I would have had everything I thought I wanted, money, power, a name people respected." He looked down at her. "But I wouldn't have had this. I wouldn't have had you." Her breath caught. "So no," he said softly. "I don't miss it. Not for a second." She reached up, touching his face, and kissed him, slow and deliberate, tasting the salt of his skin, the warmth of his breath. When they pulled apart, his eyes were soft. "I love you," he said. "I know." She smiled. "I love you too." That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Sarah stood on the porch, looking out over the orchard. The moon was full, painting everything silver. The trees stood like sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the night breeze. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, low and mournful. She thought about the girl she'd been all those years ago, standing in the rain with a basket of apples, desperate and alone, not knowing if her father would survive the night. That girl would have laughed if you told her this was her future, would have called you a liar, would have said the world didn't work that way, that kindness didn't pay, that mercy was just another word for foolishness. But she would have been wrong, because here Sarah stood, in a house she owned, on land she'd earned, surrounded by people she loved and who loved her back. And it had all started with one act of kindness, one stranger in a storm, one moment where she'd chosen compassion over fear. Daniel stepped out onto the porch beside her, 2 cups of tea in his hands. He offered her one, and she took it, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The rain," she said. "The day we met." He smiled. "Worst storm I'd ever ridden through. Best thing that ever happened to me." He looked at her surprised. "Really, really," she met his eyes. "Because it brought you, and you brought everything else." "I think you have that backward," he said quietly. "You're the one who built all this." "We built it," she corrected. "Together." He nodded slowly. "Together." They stood there in the moonlight, sipping tea, watching the orchard sway and breathe beneath the stars. And Sarah thought about legacy, about what they'd leave behind when they were gone. It wouldn't be money. It wouldn't be a name carved in stone. It would be this orchard, these people, these lives they'd touched and changed and given hope to. It would be the knowledge that kindness wasn't weakness, that mercy was the only currency that mattered. That sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stand in the rain and refuse to turn away. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel glanced at her. "For what? For coming back, for staying, for choosing this life." He set his cup down and pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "I'd choose it 1,000 times over," he said into her hair. "Every single time." And she believed him, because they'd spent 7 years proving it to each other. 7 years of rain and sun and hard work and harvest. 7 years of building something that would outlast them both. 7 years of love. The camera pulls back slowly, the porch growing smaller, the house fading into the landscape. The orchard spreads out beneath the moonlight, acre after acre of trees heavy with fruit, their leaves rustling in the night breeze. In the distance, a light glows in one of the workers' cabins. A dog barks once, then falls silent. The owl calls again, answered by another across the valley. And over it all, the sound of wind moving through branches, carrying the scent of apples and earth and rain that's yet to come. The world keeps turning. Seasons change, but some things remain. Kindness, mercy, the stubborn belief that people are worth saving, and two figures on a porch, holding each other in the moonlight, their tea growing cold, their hearts full, not because life gave them everything they wanted, but because they chose to give everything they had, to each other, to the land, to anyone who needed it, the way a girl once gave an apple to a stranger in the rain, and changed both their lives forever. The screen fades to black, not with an ending, but with a breath, a pause, a reminder that every story of mercy begins the same way, with someone choosing to stop, to see, to help, even when the rain is falling, even when no one's watching, even when the world says it doesn't matter, because it does matter. It always has, it always will, and somewhere, right now, someone is standing in a storm, waiting for a stranger to stop, waiting for kindness to prove it's real, waiting for mercy to find them, and maybe, just maybe, someone will. The way Daniel found Sarah, the way Sarah found hope, the way an orchard grew from rain and ruin and one gold coin that meant more than its weight. The way love always finds a way, if you let it, if you're brave enough to stand in the rain and refuse to leave. The end.